Welcome, everyone. I'm James Shore, and this is the Art of Agile Development Book Club. Today, we're talking about retrospectives, one of Agile's most popular techniques. Joining us today is Aino Corry. She's the author of the book Retrospectives Antipatterns and a teacher, a technical conference editor, and retrospectives facilitator. She also teaches how to teach computer science to teachers and thus lives up to the name of her company, Metadeveloper. In her spare time, she runs and sings, but not at the same time. Aino, welcome.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you here. This is a big topic. A lot of people care about retrospectives, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to get us started by reading an excerpt from The Art of Agile Development. As a reminder, the second edition is out now in both ebook and print editions. You can get it from Amazon by visiting jamesshore.com/s/buy AOAD2. And you can find excerpts and bonus material by visiting jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2. Retrospectives. We continually improve our work habits. Key idea, continuous improvement. Every Agile team is different. The team members are different, the stakeholders are different, and what the team needs to do is different. That means every team's process needs to be different too. Although it's usually best to learn Agile by starting with an off-the-shelf process, such as the one in this book, that's the beginning, not the end. There are always ways to make your team's process work better, and when your situation changes, your process needs to change with it. Agile teams constantly look for opportunities to improve their process, work habits, relationships, and environment. Anything that will make their work better is open for consideration. Organizations can put constraints around their team's processes, but they should never expect every team to have the exact same process. The more teams can customize their process to their specific needs, the more effective they'll be. Your team should constantly update and improve your development process. Retrospectives are a great way to do so. All right, let's get started with our first topic. Retrospectives are a powerful tool if used correctly, but you are the author of the book Retrospectives Antipatterns, Aino. So I know you've seen them go wrong. What are some of the most common ways you've seen retrospectives go wrong?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jim. It's really important to me, obviously. And there are just so many things that can go wrong in retrospectives. It's actually a pretty difficult thing to make right. When people hear about it first, they think it's easy, but it might be simple, but it's definitely not easy. And one of the things that I see going wrong is that you ignore the prime directive by Norm Kurth. I think that this prime directive is one of the backbones of retrospectives. If you don't try to have that mindset, which is everybody did the best they could, given what they knew at the time and the resources and the time available. That's the mindset that Norm Kurth said in his prime directive that we should try to have when we enter a retrospective. And I think it's so important that we try to do that. There are some people who can't truly and genuinely believe that everybody did the best they could because maybe they know that they didn't do the best they could. But you should at least try to strive for that mindset. You should at least not ignore that. You should say it either in the email invitation, or you should mention it when you start. Remember, we're here to find improvements in the system, not faults in the people. And I think it's important to think about that for yourself as well as a facilitator, that even though you have a retrospective where you think, we didn't quite talk about this, that I think we should talk about. And I think we skate over the inside section, but you also did the best you could, given your energy that day and what you knew. And I think that this is an important thing to think about, but it's not easy.
Yeah. The prime directive is something I bring up every time I do a retrospective. And I work with a lot of new teams, as I imagine you do too. And I often get sort of this skeptical response of, no, I don't think everybody did the best they could, especially from programmers who tend to be sort of like both somewhat negative in outlook sometimes and also very picky about wording. What do you do in that situation? Like, how do you get people to accept this idea that it's okay to accept that people are not going to have been perfect?
Yeah, I think it's correct that you're talking about the wording there, because if you just take Norm Kurth's wording, that can sometimes put some people off. Like they say, we can't truly and genuinely believe this. This is just too much. But then you can use it in your own words and say that we appreciate that people make mistakes. We appreciate that we are not all working equally hard, but it is because we have different circumstances. And then I'm reminding them how easy it is to, like, if you're coming too late to a meeting, you understand why you're coming too late to that meeting, and you probably forgive yourself because there was a good reason for being late, right? But if other people are late, you'll think, they're just not respecting that. They're just and that's a fallacy of putting blame to other people and not so much to yourself. I realize there are some people who only blame themselves, but I think in the environment where we work, that is not the most common problem. Yeah. And also I think that it's a bit like when I was a teacher at university for many years, and one of the things that baffled me was that one of the reasons why students are afraid of asking questions or afraid of giving answers is that they think that they're expected to know everything all the time. And I try to explain to them that's really a stupid understanding, because the reason why you're taking this course is because you have to learn it, right? And that is why you will be asking questions that seem stupid. That's why you will be giving answers that are not correct. Yet, if you could answer all the questions and you didn't have any questions, then you didn't need this course. And it's the same for a retrospective, that I think it's important to accept that the only way to learn, the only way to change the way that you think about things, the only way to become better is to have some sort of setting where you can talk about these things that might not work as well as you expected them to, or that took longer, or that didn't work at all.
Yeah. So what do the rest of you think? Have you seen retrospectives go wrong? Would love to hear from you. Again, to participate, just raise your hand in Zoom and we'll call on you. So skipping the retrospective prime directive, I think it feels awkward also. Like when I turn over, so I'm teaching people how to facilitate retrospectives, and when I turn it over to the group, there's this sort of discomfort. Oh, it feels silly. What else have you seen go wrong? What are some other common mistakes people make with retrospectives?
Yeah, well, from your script, there's a lot of things we're going to go through, but another thing that I really want to mention is the anti-pattern that I call Wheel of Fortune. And I call it Wheel of Fortune because, in Ativoli, we have this Wheel of Fortune, and we turn that Wheel of Fortune and it goes tick, 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 and then it ends on a number. And then sometimes that number gives you a huge prize and it's great. But most often that number just gives you a small plastic thing that will break tomorrow. And the reason why I call my anti-pattern Wheel of Fortune is because I want to describe the situation where you go directly from gathering data to deciding what to do. So, for instance, you use that start, stop, continue. And there's nothing wrong with the start, stop, continue activity as long as you generate insights afterwards. But if you go directly from start, stop, continue to deciding what to do, then that start, stop, continue lends you to come up with solutions instead of talking about the problems. And in those cases, sometimes you're solving the symptoms and not the actual problems. So you might be saying, people ignore the pull requests, right? So the solution obviously is, if they ignore them, we'll set up a bot in our Slack system so that they'll be pinged until they do something about the pull requests. And then we move on to the next sprint. And then the same thing happens, because if we had worked a little bit with that, then maybe we would understand that the reason why they ignore the pull requests is not because they forget them. It's because they don't know what to do. They are worried about doing something wrong or whatever it is. And if you just jump from that data directly into deciding what to do, it's like the Wheel of Fortune, because sometimes you find something that you can solve immediately, but other times you're missing the point, and by solving these symptoms, the problem still exists and the causes behind the problem still exists.
Yeah. Llewellyn Falco is here and has something to say. Llewellyn, welcome.
Hey, question that I have a lot, or a problem I have a lot with retrospectives, is just getting my team to remember everything that happened. Do you have suggestions about that?
Yeah, several. I have worked with a lot of teams that don't remember what has happened. And then when we put up that timeline or something, they don't know what to put up there. They say, I don't even remember what I had for dinner yesterday. So I do several things with those people. One thing that I've done with more or less success is that I have a real-time timeline. So that is that when I'm done with the retrospective, if it's online, I set up a new online document and send them the link right after the retrospective, so that whenever they experience anything or think about anything, they can put it up there. If it was a real life retrospective and people were working in the same room, then I would simply make a timeline on the wall. So that real-time timeline can help some people in some teams, but you shouldn't.
So you can just gather notes as the team actually progresses.
Yeah, but I also sometimes say just write post-it notes and put them next to your desk. Whenever you experience anything, whenever you think anything, then you can put it there. And the risk of that is, of course, that if they experience something, they'll just say this will wait for the retrospective instead of maybe dealing with them immediately. Another thing that happens if I have a group where they don't want to write a lot of post-it notes for several reasons. It could be because they've forgotten. It could be because they don't really think like that, that they can't come up with small snippets of information or incidents. Then I use that team radar exercise, where you make the radar and then you say, how are we on quality from 0 to 5? How are we on what could it be? Communication, how happy are we? Because then I ask them, instead of thinking about writing some things down, then I just ask them to vote from 0 to 5 on different aspects of their group work. And then we take the discussion from there.
So if they can't remember stuff, instead do an evaluation of where they are.
Could be one solution.
Understood that correctly?
Yeah, that could be one solution. And the other one is to make them write it down along the way.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Llewellyn.
Yeah, thank you.
This is actually a good segue into our next topic, which is how to keep retrospectives interesting. Teams often have sort of this, what did we do well? What did we do poorly? What can we improve? Script. And it often does jump directly from that to, and then what are we going to do about it? But even if you've got a good script, any format can get tiring after a while. So what are some ways that what are some things you do to keep your retrospectives interesting?
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting question, and I just want to put a few words on that before I start actually answering that question, because I'm doing a lot of teaching and facilitation, and I'm giving a lot of talks about retrospective facilitation. And one thing that has started bugging me, and I think I've been part of that previously, is that people want fun retrospectives. Like they want to laugh, they want fun retrospectives. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having fun retrospectives per se. I like fun, I like laughter. So it's not that I'm against, but I think that they're missing the point a bit. I think that what you want is constructive retrospectives. And I think if you have constructive retrospectives, then they feel good, even if you don't laugh. So that's just what I wanted to say before I dive into that. It's just something that I think is almost becoming a misunderstanding, that it has to be really funny. And it's nice that it's funny, but that's not the important thing. So let
me follow up on that for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a really good point. Would you agree with the idea that it's not only does it not have to be fun, it should be a little bit not uncomfortable necessarily, but you should feel like you're getting into some meat in there, right? And that does tend to be a little bit uncomfortable when you're really getting into stuff that matters, that's affecting the team, that is a true opportunity to make a difference. That can often feel a little bit uncomfortable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
No.
Definitely.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, but that's also a good point. Is that if it's too easy and too fun, then it can be superficial and shallow, and you're only really talking about the coffee in the canteen or something like that. You're not really getting into the things that are painful. So there's a question from Lisa. I don't know if I should answer your question first, James, and then go into Lisa's question.
Whichever you prefer.
Okay. I'll take your first because I've thought about that, and then I'll think about Lisa's while I'm talking. So one of the things that I suggest to people when they go into that monotony is that they could try to make somebody else facilitate the retrospective. So sometimes another person in the team actually would be okay to facilitate. And if they don't have a lot of experience in facilitating, then If it's an online retrospective, there's a lot of online tools that helps you facilitate a retrospective without knowing an awful amount of facilitation. They help you along the way. They tell you what to do, tell you what to say, things like Nitro and Retro. And if you're doing an in real life retrospective, then Alan Kelly's dialogue sheets are wonderful because you can download them and you can play them almost like a board game. So you can have somebody else in the team facilitate, or you can have somebody in your organization facilitate, so that you swap teams that you facilitate, or you can get somebody from outside to facilitate. But I think that one of the things that are important, as I said before, is that you have to make it very obvious to people that this is a constructive use of their time. So if they get a bit monotonous, if you feel that people are not interested anymore, then I think you should put a little bit more emphasis on why you're doing the activities and what you're getting out of it. And what I sometimes do with teams that are getting tired of retrospectives is that after maybe 3 or 6 months, I make a retrospective over the retrospective, and I take all the action points that they've made in 3 or 6 months, and I put them up on the wall. And that is the data that we use for this retrospective. And then I take all the ones that they've done and I move them over to done. And I ask them, what did you get out of that? Did you get something out of doing this? So that they see that they actually got something out of doing it. And then the things that are no longer relevant, we sort of throw away. And then we're left with something which is not done, but it is still relevant. And that's interesting. And then you spend the rest of the time in the retrospective on that pile, because that could be because it's not something that you can do in 2 weeks. It's a longer plan, or it's something that somebody else has to do, or it's something that the team just doesn't have the energy to do. Mm-hmm. And then we can have a conversation about that.
I love that idea. This is the first I've heard of it, that the retrospective, I've heard sort of at the end of the retrospective, let's do a little mini, how is the retrospectives going? But the idea of after 3 to 6 months doing a retrospective that just goes back and looks at all the outcomes, I think that's a neat idea. I also want to, I really want to highlight what you said about having different people on the team facilitate. And this is something that I particularly see from teams with Scrum Masters who feel like their job is to sort of be facilitators for the team, which is that I think that there's a lot of value in the team sharing ownership of duties like facilitation.
Yeah.
And one of the things I teach my teams is that we're going to rotate all the facilitation responsibilities for the team. And one of those is retrospective facilitation. So every week, let's have somebody else facilitate. And some people are going to really dive into that and come up with something elaborate. And some people are just going to keep it really simple because they're not super comfortable. But it's always a supportive environment, right? Because it's just the team. And one team I worked with decided that they were just going to have whoever facilitated the retrospective that week was also going to sort of be on top of reminding people of all the ceremonies throughout the week. And other teams have taken a more fluid response to it. So let me go ahead and, because for the recording, people won't be able to see the chat. Let me go ahead and read out what Lisa said here in the chat. Now I'm just, let me just, I've not actually read it yet. Lisa says, I recently helped some PMs and Scrum Masters reignite their retrospectives. And one of the issues they experience is silent teams. They don't speak up at all. So if we eliminate fear as one of the reasons for that problem, which advice would you typically give the Scrum Master or facilitator of the retrospective event?
Yeah, so that's a big issue, because when people are silent, you don't necessarily know why they're silent. It's a bit like I talked before about the symptoms and the causes. The symptom, what you see is that they're silent, and there can be an immense amount of reasons for that. If we think that it is fear, as Lisa suggests here, then I think it might be interesting to figure out what it is they're actually afraid of. It might be nice to talk to the people in the team one-on-one, or it could be interesting to talk to the PM or the Scrum Master to ask them if they experience this in other ceremonies as well, or if it's only the retrospective. Because if it's only the retrospective, then perhaps there's something about the retrospective that could be changed. And if it's all the meetings, then it's probably something that needs to be changed in the team. And one of the things that people are talking so much about at the moment, luckily, is psychological safety. And that psychological safety is not something that you can just create, but it's definitely something that you can easily destroy. So I think that if you notice something like that, then okay, it's only the retrospective. Yeah. So they might have, they have a lot of work ahead of them, I think, the Scrum Master and the PM, to try to create some sort of trust between these people. Because if they don't want to speak up in the retrospective and they want to speak up in the other meetings, it's probably because they don't want to talk about things that are problematic or things that are unconstructive or things that are not as they hoped they would be. And to me, the building up trust is an equation of relationship and reliability. And if we think about people that we trust, it's probably people that we have a relation to and that we can rely on. Definitely, it's like that for me. If you look at psychology research about trust, the equation is much more difficult. But the short one is reliability and relation. And relation is definitely something that you can work with in a team, where instead of just having these technical, factual meetings, you can try having some more social meetings or just icebreakers where you ask people about where you're going on vacation, or what are you looking forward to, or what was the first thing you bought for your own money, or what was the first pet you had, or whatever. And it sounds a bit like hippie happy. But if you explain to people that we are now building a relation, which will make it easier for you to ask for help or to say when something goes wrong, if they know the psychological reason for it, it's much easier for them, in my experience, to accept it. And then to the reliability part of the trust or the psychological safety, that you need to be able to rely on people, that if they said they will do something, then they will either do it or they will let you know that they're not doing it. And these are things that can be built up with a process. So instead of just saying we're using the Scrum process and we're doing everything like that, there's nothing wrong with the Scrum process, but you might need some more process. You might need some more communication about how do we do peer review, some more communication about, so in the morning, do we say good morning in the Slack, or do we meet every Friday to talk about things that we learned this week or whatever? So building that relationship and reliability is something that should be done, but it should be done in between the retrospectives, which, sorry, I'm saying so much to this, but it's such an important, thing.
Yeah.
And I think that I once heard Daniel North say that when you introduce Agile to an organization, it's a bit like turning on the light. You're in a dark room and then somebody turns on the light bulb and there's a huge tiger standing next to you, and people are getting really pissed with the one that turned on the light bulb and said, "You idiot, why did you do that? There's a big tiger." And of course, the tiger was always there. And I think retrospectives are a bit like that you can't necessarily solve all the problems with the retrospective, but you will be introduced to some problems. You will see some of the things. And one of the things is they're quiet when they have to talk about things that are difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. You've brought up so much there. Psychological safety, of course, is a big one. And I want to mention that we did discuss psychological safety in a past book club. You can find that link at jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club. We had Gita Klickart join us for that discussion. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen that.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah, she's great. A couple of other thoughts came to me, and I'm going to use this as a segue into our next topic. But first, before that, one thing that I see that you might want to consider if you're in a situation where you've got people who don't want to speak up, if you're seeing a silent lack of participation in just one meeting, that may mean that the facilitator is being over controlling and is doing too much. So stepping back, or even letting the team conduct the retro on their own without you present might be a way of helping to address it if they know how to do it. I do find that the work I do, leaving is a great way to get people to step up once they have the skills. It's not the first thing to do, but there does come a point where it's helpful. The other thing I see, and this sort of is a segue into our next topic, is that I do see a lot of teams that don't have a lot of faith in retrospectives, that they just feel like the retrospective is a waste of time. And that can be a reason to sort of passive aggressively not say anything as well. And I think that feeling of, well, the retrospective is worthless comes from nothing happening as a result of the retrospective, the not closing the loop, not following through on what comes out of the retrospective. So do you see that as well, Aino? And what do you do about it? How do you help teams follow through on their actual retrospective?
Yeah, I see that a lot. And the reason why people say that retrospectives can be a waste of time is that because a lot of the retrospectives are a waste of time, because even if you talk about the right things and people are talking and they feel like they can talk about it, you spend a lot of time coming up with brilliant little things to do. But if you don't do those brilliant little things, then of course it was a waste of time. Well, not completely, because they did get to share and it might be team building-ish, but they don't really change anything. And the point about the retrospectives is inspect and adapt, right? We need to figure out how it's going and where we're going to go. So there's a lot of things that can make or break this situation. And one of the things that I tell people that they hate the most, that I tell them, I mean, they're cool with me saying you need to make SMART goals, you need to make them visible, you need to follow up preferably every day. But what they don't like to hear me say is that those action points need to be first-class citizens together with all the other stuff that they're doing. So it's not enough to have a user story where you have, that's called retrospective actions, and then it's got 42 small tasks from the last 10 retrospectives that hasn't been done. That is not the way to do it. So I say if you have action points that you actually believe will change something, you create them equally to the other stories. If you're estimating, you will estimate them. If you're prioritizing, you will prioritize them. Because if you don't do that, then you come back to real life in a sense. And there's always these things that are more important. But the point about retrospectives is to make the team better and to make the people in the team feel better. And if you neglect that, your team will not become better. And the people might quit the job in the end, because all the things that they're saying is not working will never be changed. In the beginning they love the retrospectives. I get to talk about the things that doesn't work. But if they notice then that nobody's really listening and we don't really have time, why bother? Right?
Yeah. That's this sort of, there's always this conflict, I think, between using your capacity and then versus taking actions that increase your capacity. Yes. And it seems that organizations often, and not just organizations, actually, I think that's a little bit wrong. I do see from leadership in organizations the recognition that we need to spend time to increase capacity as well as user capacity. I would actually say that it's more at the ground level on the teams themselves. A lot of the developers I meet feel like they've just got to be pushing all the time, getting those tickets done, which is a whole nother problem of its own, the sort of ticket mindset. But they just need to be pushing stuff out. And if they're not working on delivering, then they're not making progress.
Yeah.
But of course, if you're doing that, then you're not getting better. If you're not getting better, then you're leaving opportunities on the table in terms of capacity, as well as just a better job.
Yeah, it's a bit like when you're using a knife and it's getting less and less sharp. I don't know what the English word is for it getting less sharp. In Danish, it's def. So, and you need to take time to sharpen your knife from time to time. Otherwise, your work just gets slower and slower and worse quality.
Yeah. Let's switch gears for a moment. And talk about impediments. And again, love to hear from everybody who's participating in the channel. Just raise your hand in Zoom. Let us know your thoughts as well. So the main topic today is retrospectives, but of course, retrospectives surface impediments of some sort. And then you've got to deal with those. Now, when you have impediments that are under your direct control, then you just resolve it. But a lot of the impediments we face are not under our direct control. What do you do about those situations? What do you do when there's something that needs to be improved, but your team does not have the authority or ability to address it themselves?
Well, first you need to accept that is in fact the situation. And I know that you're also using the soup diagram in your book. And I think that the soup diagram where after you've gathered data or after you've brainstormed on action points, then you use the soup diagram to figure out which of these things can the team actually do something about, which of these things can the team say something about, and which of these things does the team need to find a way to adapt to. So I think that's the first step is to have that awareness, so you don't come out with 2 action points that you can actually do anything about. And then when you have that awareness that there are these issues that we can't do anything about, then sometimes you can have a discussion with them and figure out there's actually part of the issue that you can do something about. Or perhaps you will invite somebody to the next retrospective that will make this circle of influence bigger, because of course, the more people you are at the retrospective, the bigger is the circle of influence. And you might actually invite the manager or somebody from another team to the next retrospective based on that. And then sometimes I also take, if they're not interested in that, I sometimes ask for permission to take some of these points and bringing them to the person without giving the names, as saying, these are one of the things that we discussed in the retrospective. And I don't know if you would like to set up a meeting for us to discuss that or something like that. So I'm not a telltale. Of course, I will ask them for permission, because one of the biggest and the most important things in the retrospective is that trust, that you are not running around laughing to everybody about the stupidity that happened in there. That's sort of one of the points. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I've forgotten where I started.
No, I think it did. What you're saying is, when you don't have direct influence or direct control, then be aware of that and then do what you can to influence it. And one of the ways you can influence is by inviting managers to the retrospective. And that's an interesting one to me, because I hadn't heard that before. I've always taken the stance that we really want the retrospective to be manager free, so people could feel comfortable speaking up. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what happens. So if you invite a manager to the retrospective, or presumably the next retrospective, what happens in that discussion? What does the team do? How do you facilitate that so that it's productive and ends up making a difference?
Yeah, so I'm very clear about why I'm doing this. I'm saying that we have this extra person in the retrospective today because we want to widen the circle of influence. And then I'm saying that the person who's invited, if it's a manager, has to participate together with the others. So they can't just sit and wait for a discussion that's interesting to them. If everybody is voting for things, if everybody's putting up post-it notes, they're putting up post-it notes as well. If we're voting about which one to discuss, they're voting for that. And if we are all at the same board moving things together, then they're at the same board moving things together. So they have to be on board in order also to create that trust, because if you have somebody who's just sitting there and watching it, it makes people feeling not well.
Yeah, and then managers do tend to have, some of them do tend to have this attitude, well, I'm going to sit back and observe.
Yes.
And that is a very uncomfortable. I don't know if they realize how uncomfortable that makes.
I'm just going to sit and observe and just do some emails while I'm here. So that's a big no-go. But of course, there's trade-offs. If you invite a manager that everybody's super afraid of, that's perhaps not a good idea. And that's why I'm saying that you need to be able to gauge whether it's a good idea for this team to invite the manager and ask them, of course. And then sometimes when I do it, the manager is there for the entire retrospective. Sometimes I have a shorter retrospective with a focus, with a theme, and then I make a team retrospective afterwards. And sometimes I have the manager there for parts of the retrospective, and then I throw the manager out when we're going to discuss other things. So it really depends on the situation with the manager, because if they come from a startup or a small organization, they might have had like that trust and the psychological safety with the manager at some point, and perhaps now the manager has changed just roles, but they still like each other. But it could also be a huge organization from a culture where people are getting fired for nothing, and then probably not a good idea. So it really depends on the situation, I'd say.
Yeah. Jim York in the chat says, a distracted manager in your retrospective can be more harmful to the process than an absent one. Yeah, and I would agree with that. Again, to participate, just raise your hand in Zoom. I'd love to hear from you. And I'd like to invite Steve Koh on up. Steve, welcome.
Yeah, great. Wonderful discussion. I came in a little late. I'll catch the video for the full thing. Retrospectives, I think, are key to a well-functioning team where you can reflect and improve. One of the things that I've found, and I have a question about, is a lot of times after you've been working with the team for a while, the team's been working for a while, you can stall a little bit. And it's been my experience that when you stall, it tends to be a lot of venting and the same stuff gets brought up over and over again.
Yeah.
I've turned to something that I've heard actually from Llewellyn Falco and Woody Zuhl and read about more, is focusing on the bright spots and turn up the good. Yeah. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I completely agree that when I look at teams and their and their life cycle with retrospective, they normally start off being super eager about it and they love it and it's so fantastic. And then at some point they go down. No, it's monotonous. It's not changing anything. We hate it. And then you need to figure out, how do you get it to like a normal position here? And definitely a positivity retrospective can be a good idea from time to time, where I say that now we're only going to talk about the positive things and the strengths and the successes and where we helped each other and our hopes. And sometimes they can be a bit against that in the beginning, but once we start, they see the energy, they see that it's okay. But they have to be warned. Because if they show up for a retrospective, having thought about all the things that they want to complain about, and then they're told we're only going to talk about lovely things today, then they'll be disappointed. So they have to be warned before they arrive. I think there's probably more schools about that, but I think that's a good idea. But also when they are in that position where they feel like it's hopeless and they're not really getting anything out of it, I think back to what I said probably before you came, it's really important then to focus on the constructivism of the retrospective. Say we had this check-in because of the activation phenomenon, because when everybody has said something, it's easier for people to say something again. We've decided not to mute ourselves at all, even if we're not saying anything, because we want to hear those little reactions that people have to what people are saying. Okay, so now we've shared all these things. We want to vote for what we want to do. But first, we are just voting for the things that has the most impact. And second, we're voting for what we have the energy to do. And we do that because if we don't have things that people have energy to do, they won't get done. So you see, like you explain all the time, we're going to do this because of this. And afterwards, you debrief, we did this, and this is what we got out of it.
Thank you very much for your comments, Steve. One of the things Steve mentioned, I know, was Woody Zuhl's Turn Up the Good exercise. Yeah. And this is something that I've recommended to people, but haven't had a lot of experience with myself. Let me just recap it for those of you who haven't heard it. It's just a 5-minute retro. It happens at the end of every day. So it's very short and frequent. And it's simply that. What went well today, and how can we do it even more tomorrow? And I heard about it in the context of mob programming. So we're going to work together all day today. We're going to make progress as a team. And at the end of the day, we're going to say, what can we do better, even better? What went well, what we can do even better next time. Have you had a lot of experience with this idea of a daily, short, fast retrospective? Not necessarily about Turn Up the Good specifically, but doing it every single day. This was actually something that came up in the Discord conversation as well, which is at jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 Discord for those of you who don't know about it. How does that compare to doing sort of the more typical heartbeat retrospective every week or every 2 weeks?
I've only done these daily retrospectives in relation to mob or ensemble programming, where we work together all day, and we don't want meetings and ceremonies. We're just sitting together in this mob and working, and that's the whole point. I've sometimes, when I've been good, I've done daily retrospectives with myself. Now I've been an independent for 12 years, and it's important for me to figure out what kind of my work gives me pleasure and what kind of my work takes away my energy. So the daily retrospectives I haven't done outside really of mob programming. And I think that something that's really good about these daily retrospectives is that you have a direct interaction. You can do something about it the minute you see it. So that's good. People don't forget about it. People don't wait until the retrospective to talk about it. That being said, I see the beauty in retrospecting over a longer period, sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes even 3 months, because then you sometimes see some patterns that you can't see if you just do it every day. So I think that there's good and bad things with both kinds of retrospectives.
Yeah, that was sort of my suspicion as well, is that I do notice when I think of one of those heartbeat or even longer term retrospectives is really effective, is not when we're reacting to the thing that's happening in the moment, but more when we're sort of stepping back and looking a little deeper, sort of like you said right at the beginning. We're asking, why is this happening? And why are we feeling this? so that we can dig down and address something that's more substantial. I'm not saying that doesn't happen in a daily retrospective. Again, I don't have enough experience with it to really say one way or the other. And that's also why I really love your idea that you brought up earlier about a retrospective that brings back all of the, all the topics that have come up in previous retrospectives, and let's look at them and see which have we followed through on and which we haven't. That seems like such a great way to also identify where you might want to spend a little bit more work working with your supporters in the organization to address impediments that you don't have control over.
Yeah, and the interesting thing are both the things that you've gotten done and what they've changed, but also the things that you didn't get done. Why not?
Yeah. What's going on with that is that we just don't have the energy for it. We're not making the time for it. It's just the soup, and we're going to figure out how to respond to it. So much good stuff. I think the point here that I would love everybody to come away from this conversation is there's lots of different ways of doing this, and none of them are wrong. Like do the dailies, do the heartbeats, do the longer term. And do your work too. I mean, it's not just about the retrospectives, but there's so much richness here, so many things to try and experiment with. So don't let those retrospectives just get boring, because there is a lot to try.
Agree.
That is unfortunately all the time we have today. Aino Corry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It was great to be here. And thank you for your questions and comments, everybody. And good luck with the retrospectives.
Aino Corry is a teacher, a technical conference editor, and retrospectives facilitator. Next week, we're talking about bugs, or more accurately, no bugs. Arlo Belshi and Welfare Falco will be joining us to discuss how to build quality in. They are experienced practitioners, and it is sure to be an in-depth discussion. If you like getting down into the technical details, mark your calendar for July 8th at 8 a.m. Pacific. Free reading is up at jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club, and you can join the Discord conversation by visiting jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 Discord. That is it for today. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and I will see you next week.